Thank you for joining us for our special celebration of the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. I'm Will Tran.
And I'm Gayle Long. The Bay Area is home to the largest Asian population in the continental United States, which also means there are countless stories of diversity, resilience, and triumph.
We can't possibly share all of them, but we hope that our conversation over the next half hour will inspire all of us to celebrate and honor Asian American Pacific Islander community.
May was chosen as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month to commemorate two important anniversaries: the arrival of the first Japanese immigrant in the U.S. on May 7, 1843, and the completion of the first transcontinental railroad on May 10, 1869, all made possible by the labor of thousands of Chinese workers. Since then, the month has been about celebrating the achievements and contributions of the AAPI community.
But this year, it's happening in the shadows of violent crimes targeting Asians in the Bay Area and across the country.
In fact, the national coalition addressing anti-Asian hate, called Stop AAPI Hate, recorded more than 6,600 hate incidents from mid-March of last year to the end of March of this year. In fact, verbal harassment and name-calling took up about 65% of the incidents, shunning made up 18%, and physical assault close to 13%. And of the more than 6,600, 2,400 hate incidents were recorded in the first 3 months of this year.
As we're coming out of the pandemic, before during quarantine, more of the occurrences of racism were at private businesses, but now it's actually happening more in public sites, sidewalks, parks. So the trend is that as we come out of quarantine, people are interacting more and we're facing more racism in public spaces.
Russell Jung is co-chair of Stop AAPI Hate and a professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State. He started a coalition to demonstrate that racism is not only widespread, but also deep-rooted, a problem that he says we should keep in mind during this time of celebrations.
Asian Pacific Heritage Month involves both acknowledging the long history of racism that we've experienced, but also celebrating our history of resistance, our history and legacy, promoting civil rights, and the long history of activism. So for me, Asian Pacific American Heritage Month is about knowing how Asian Americans do belong to the United States, have shaped the narrative, and will continue to fight for racial justice.
Jung says the response to his nonprofit has been overwhelmingly positive, with Asian Americans stepping up to educate and protect each other.
The attacks on Asian Americans seem to be on TV and online all the times these days. The media is covering our community like never before. I spoke to a media expert who says this wasn't always the case.
This is a horrible time, I think, for anyone in the Asian American community. It's just tragic.
San Francisco State professor and longtime reporter John Funubiki says Asian Americans are finally getting media attention. Not because the media suddenly cared. It took violence and...
Now we're capturing video as the attack happens.
To make the media finally sit up.
In general, I don't think news organizations cover these kinds of stories because they care or have empathy. I think it's because these types of stories, really speaking about these types of violent attacks, particularly against elderly and vulnerable people, are very sensational. They drive eyeballs.
Funubiki says historically, whenever America has problems with Asia, whether it's politics or lately the pandemic, many people take their frustrations out on Asian Americans.
As long as we've been here in the United States, as citizens and residents, a lot of people still think of us as foreigners, as aliens.
Funubiki says last year, then President Trump, when he called COVID-19 the China virus and Kung flu, fanned the flames of racism, which led to the explosion in anti-Asian attacks.
They're hard to watch, really. I mean, when you see a man doing a flying leap feet first and knocking over a 70-year-old Asian man, that is hard to watch.
And Funubiki hopes the attacks on Asians, of course, will end, but hopes the media, once it goes away, they also won't go away.
The violent crimes against Asian Americans are also pushing religious leaders to take action. A group of Korean pastors held an online discussion this month on the topic of anti-Asian hate. Longtime Bay Area pastor Hyokin Kwon says there wasn't much awareness around Asian hate crimes within his congregation prior to the pandemic. But as crimes against Asian Americans escalate, he says it's time for his congregation and other religious communities to speak up.
Our belief that humans are equal before God should not be challenged for any reason. As a religious leader, I hope that each religious community will address not only the emphasis on individual spiritual life, but also social spirituality, such as racial justice.
Pastor Kwon says the Korean American community was especially shaken by the Atlanta spa shooting in March, where 4 of the 8 people killed were Korean women.
We have to make sure that it's not just a moment in time, that this is actually a movement. The door has been pushed open and we need to push through that.
A Hollywood heavyweight standing with the Asian American community. Actor Daniel Wu shares his long-term goals to stop Asian hate.
Plus, how this San Mateo County native is breaking boundaries and inspiring the next generation of Asian American dancers.
And history made in the nation and right here in the Bay Area. Vice President Kamala Harris and California Attorney General Rob Bonta putting down their mark.
And what a testament it is to Joe's character that he had the audacity to break one of the most substantial barriers that exists in our country and select a woman as his vice president. But while I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last.
Back on November of 2020, our nation made history. Kamala Harris was not only elected the first female vice president, but also the first Black and Asian American vice president.
And in April of this year, California made history by naming East Bay Assembly member Rob Bonta as the state's first Asian American attorney general.
Bonta kicked off this year's Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in San Francisco. This is when he also promised actions to address hate crimes and encourage more people to come forward. Just about a week later, Bonta announced the state's Justice Department is launching a new bureau to try to stop hate crimes.
Making sure that in the middle of this horrific hate crimes crisis, when it comes to the API community, that we're stepping in and stepping up to prevent and educate on the front end, to identify, investigate, and as well as to make sure there's accountability.
The Attorney General is also working on a regional approach with the mayors of the state's 13 biggest cities, including San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose.
She is a professional dancer, model, and fashion entrepreneur living her dream in New York City and an advocate for Asian Americans in the arts. We introduce you to San Mateo County native Candy Tong.
At 9 years old, Candy Tong knew she found her calling.
Being an Asian American dancer is already so rare in my world. I remember growing up at Sarasota Ballet, I only got to look up to 2 Asian American dancers.
Tong says she was one of 3 to 4 Asian American students in her class at the San Francisco Ballet, but never saw herself as being a minority, but felt different after landing the role of Clara in The Nutcracker.
It's not known to have an Asian Clara, Black Clara. So for me to have had that role at such a young age I knew it was something very special and something I had to bring along with me in the future.
That future leading Tong to train at Pacific Northwest Ballet in Seattle, Washington, and English National Ballet in the United Kingdom. But she faced challenges while auditioning for professional dance companies all around Europe.
One, I was too tall. I'm 5'10", without point shoes or heels. Secondly, my American visa. And thirdly, that I was Asian. And so hearing those 3 things, especially about my race, was difficult and also just incredibly frustrating.
Tong says those 3 repeaters often came up in post-audition feedback. The San Mateo County native advocates for diversity in the renowned dance world, an industry she says Asians are underrepresented.
And it's 2021, and I want people to push their limits and be who they are, be unapologetically you, be unapologetically Asian, and just go about life how you were born to be.
Unapologetically Asian is a movement Tong started in 2019, before the pandemic and heightened reports of attacks on the Asian community. Tong credits the support of her parents who encouraged her to pursue her passion in dance. Fashion designer is the latest title to her name. Her dancewear line launched right before parts of the country issued stay-at-home orders. Tong is living in New York City under contract with Complexion's Contemporary Ballet, a place that allows her to travel the world showing passion for the arts and music.
I want to be a mentor for young Asian American dancers. I want to be their inspiration. I want to make a change, whether it's in the dance world, modeling world, or my new world as a dancepreneur, fashion designer.
Coming up, breaking barriers with Fong Torres, how a young boy from Oakland's Chinatown became a star journalist in the world of rock and roll.
This is a very diverse community, and I know that we are better than this.
Shock, frustration, and anger over what's happening to Asian Americans fuel a Hollywood heavyweight to lend his voice. Actor and Berkeley native Daniel Wu is now among the most outspoken critics of anti-Asian hate crimes.
In February, Wu offered a $25,000 reward for information on the person who shoved a 90-year-old man in Oakland's Chinatown in late January. Wu says he and another actor, Daniel Dae Kim, offered the reward not necessarily to punish the attacker, but to bring attention to what's causing the violence.
In a lot of the cases, there's mental health issues. There's, poverty issues, there's transitional issues. And so that we need to really create a whole system that helps end mass incarceration, but also helps these people transition back into society and prevent them from doing violent crimes again. And I think that's what I've seen recently, is that we have the notion to start doing that, but the system isn't fully in place yet. So we need to work on counseling. We need to work on mental health stuff. Like, we have to make sure there's not just a moment in time, that this is actually a movement. The door has been pushed open and we need to push through that.
In the midst of the ongoing violence, Wu is calling on this year's Asian American Pacific Heritage Month special because this is the first time that he says he's seen the Asian American community come together and stand up for the same cause. Now to another Bay Area icon, an Oakland native, Fong Torres is paving the way for Asian Americans in the world of journalism.
He was the first Asian American editor at Rolling Stone magazine. I got to sit down with him to look back on his star-filled career.
Read it twice to give it a good go.
Fong Torres has seen more stars than perhaps NASA.
Reverend Al Green.
The rock journalist became a star while covering some of the world's most legendary singers and actors.
Linda Ronstadt to Bob Dylan, from George Harrison and Paul McCartney to the Rolling Stones.
When he began his career more than 5 decades ago, it was pretty obvious. Few people look like him.
There was just nobody out there doing that. And so I had no role models who were Asian Americans. I had role models for sure in show business and radio and television and writing, but nothing outside of those folks. And so, yeah, my dreams were kind of limited. To be realistic, I thought if I get to be a reporter in Central California, yeah, I'll be okay.
I think you've done more than be a reporter in Central California.
I'm still aiming at Chico.
Fong Torres was a reporter and editor while attending San Francisco State. A few years later, he would be a reporter for legendary Rolling Stone magazine, writing about singers that are soundtracks for many people's lives.
You got Michael Jackson?
Despite standing out, Fong Torres says he never faced any overt acts of racism while covering the stars and did not feel the weight of being a trailblazer on his shoulders. He let his presence and his writing do the talking for him.
And you don't need reminders. You know, you're aware of yourself, and so when you see a photograph or yourself on video or whatever, you know, oh yeah, right. And you stand out mentally for yourself, and sometimes it's to the positive.
With the attacks on the Asian community, he's also very busy making sure to keep his head on a swivel.
Even on walks with my wife Diane, I'm just constantly kind of keeping an eye out, just doing chores, just going to the neighborhood stores and restaurants for pickup, and whatever it is I'm doing, I now am looking around, and not just to the side, but front and back.
Fong Torres has come a long way since working at his family's restaurant as a child. He is a treasure to the entertainment community and an even bigger treasure to the Asian American community.
Well, that part of my career is a great pleasure. That, yes, there were people who looked at the masthead and said, what? Or the byline, or heard the voice, and then my mentioning stuff in Cantonese. I'm glad it did spark a number of people, and that spark continues.
Fong Torres, he doesn't plan to slow down anytime soon. He's currently working with the company about a documentary about his life and career. Just to put in perspective, not many reporters get a documentary, so he's a big deal.
Well, that's quite a roster and an archive of celebrities. Did he say which stars? Did he have a favorite?
He said Ray Charles was among his favorite. He loved Marvin Gaye, but it wasn't all just singers. One of his favorite interviews, Steve Martin. So you might have seen in the story where all those pictures scrolled up. His computer is filled with pictures, and he only gave me a little bit of it. So much of it, I can probably spend all day with the pictures and the people that he met. But definitely those three, when he brought their names up, he smiled. He loves Steve Martin.
Well, that's quite an archive. Great story, Will.
I think that hate is such a weird word, because I think that, you know, I have this thing, I believe that everyone's trying to do good.
And this San Francisco business owner is sharing that belief with millions of people around the world. Up next, we introduce you to TikTok sensation, Your Korean Dad. Maybe you've seen him on TikTok. A San Francisco father and business owner is now living a double life as an internet sensation.
Vicky Liviakis introduces us to a local guy who's reached TikTok stardom as Your Korean Dad.
Korean Dad, you want me to order some food?
He's Your Korean Dad, Nick Cho.
Kimchi!
Your Korean Dad is an internet sensation with millions of followers. So we followed Nick to San Francisco and his charming coffee house called Wrecking Ball.
Coffee's fantastic. Coffee's about people.
And since it's been a wrecking ball of a year, it seems only fitting to down a cup with Nick and talk about coffee, food, and what makes Your Korean Dad so wildly popular.
My followers are from every walk of life, every race, gender, you know, sexual orientation, even like international. I think that there's something about what I'm putting out there that appeals to people. I gotta admit, like, I don't understand all of it.
Let me make you one of my favorite mealtime secrets. It's a super easy Korean barbecue.
For me, saying that I'm Korean, I'm really trying to, I'm kind of giving away the secret in a way, that I'm trying to really normalize the idea of every American comes from somewhere.
Okay, let's go.
People look at you like you're the new Mr. Rogers.
I'm a huge Mr. Rogers fan, and I take that really seriously. That's a big responsibility, even if I don't completely accept it 100%. But I know what people mean by that. You know, it's a certain sort of figure that people haven't seen out there in a while.
I just want to say, I'm so proud of you.
I start out most of my videos going like this. It's like a little head pat. I like being touched on the head. It's something that I always liked when my parents did. And so it's just a little sign of affection, just virtually.
Hey, I'm your Korean Dad.
Your Korean Dad shows you how to make curry rice, for instance.
I'm gonna make curry rice.
He dispenses fatherly advice and friendly encouragement, something we could all use.
So glad I got to share this little mealtime hack with you.
It became popular in Korea, called finger hearts. So it makes like a little heart shape, if you could imagine it over your fingers. It's a tiny heart. You can do hand hearts bigger. Yeah, you can
Sure,
use
your
big R
Korean
hearts like
dad
this.
might teach you how to make a good cup of coffee or cook up chicken nuggets,
That's right. I baked some chicken nuggets.
but his secret recipe is sincerity that feeds the soul.
It's a lot like being a parent.
In San Francisco, Vicki Leviakis, KRON4 News.
And that wraps up our special celebrating Asian American Pacific Heritage Month. We hope that this has been an opportunity for us to share the stories about your family, friends, and neighbors. Get out there and spread diversity.
We also invite you to start your own conversations about race and heritage. Thank you for joining us.